Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining this session. It's about reducing carbon through facilities management and looking particularly at Scope 3 emissions. My name is Sunil Shah from Acclaro Advisory, and I'm going to be moderating this session today. Joining us today, we've got three fantastic speakers as well. Sharon Maynard from Skanska, Sophie Hooper from IWFM, and Anthony Heaton from BAM FM. What I'll do is I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and also to talk briefly about their organisations and how they're progressing in sustainability and Scope 3 as well. We're then going to break out into a panel discussion. If you've got any questions which you'd like to ask the panelists, please do enter them into the chat function, and then we'll try and get through as many of the questions as we can. But what I wanted to start off doing was to introduce the SFMI and also the piece of work which we're undertaking around Scope 3 emissions. So the SFMI itself is an initiative of Acclaro Advisory, and we're here very much about how do we drive ESG leadership within the FM sector. So it's about how do we incorporate that as part of the day-to-day operations of the business of FM sector overall. And we do that primarily through a number of routes, through research activities, through engagement and collaboration, and through an assessment and awards programme. And the purpose of this call today is around looking at greenhouse gas emissions and the role of FM as well. And if we take a step back and look at emissions overall, 30% or so of UK emissions and around over 40% of global emissions are related to the built environment activities, and a lot of existing stock is already in place. So for Western Europe, US and Australia, it's very much around an 80% plus type regime. And then in Asia Pacific areas, we're getting towards closer to a 60 to 70% area. So significant amounts of building stock is already in place. So we are starting to look more at how we deal with existing buildings and how we look to upgrade existing buildings, which becomes a key part of the greenhouse gas profile. When we start to look at carbon emissions across the built environments, we do cover an area which looks at the front end around how we develop the buildings in the first place, the use stage, and then what happens afterwards as well, an end of life, and then a potential reuse of that as well. And from an operational buildings perspective, we do look at areas which focus very much around the operational energy use activity, and then around elements such as the refurbishment activities as well. So very much what we're looking at here is that life cycle, and we want to understand what that wider built environment carbon impact is, because it's part of a benefit, public benefit, but also a sustainable built environment benefits. And the challenge that we've got within all of this is, are we fully calculating and including the role that FM has as part of this as well? So this is the services that goes into enabling a building to operate and the individuals that are within that building for that to operate as well. So it's about the data collection, it's about understanding the roles that happen within that building. And so here we're starting to ask the question, what is the purpose of the non-domestic sector? So commercial buildings, what is that? What is it there for? And a lot of it is about how do we bring people together? And therefore, it's not just about the embodied carbon, it's not just about the operational emissions, but it's also about all the enabling factors that go into making the building a building, making the building habitable and supportive of bringing people together. And so the ability to be able to capture that data and that information becomes critical to help us to understand what the whole life building carbon impact is, and then the role that FM has to play as part of being able to reduce it. So this is where the research program has come in, and currently, currently the vision that we're looking at is very much about understanding how we get towards zero carbon in the built environment and the role that FM has as part of that. So understanding the knowledge and being able to use that as we go through the whole design and operational cycle as well. So the intention that we've got is to develop a program. There's a standard that will be developed, there'll be a tool that will be developed, and a suite of knowledge-based information to help the sector to be able to apply this on a consistent platform. And we've got some wonderful organisations that are involved in the program with us, a series of 4 organisations: Optima, BAM, Skanska and Bouygues, and then 3 professional institutions: IEMA, IWFM and RICS. So the program itself is live. We're into phase 2 at the minute. If you want to download any of the materials, we'll put that into the chat function as well, free to access. And what we want is feedback from individuals as well about how we can improve the information that we have and get it taken up more readily. So that's an introduction in terms of the program and where we are in terms of scope 3. But in terms of digging into that into a bit more detail, we'll do that as part of the discussion itself. What I'll do now is hand over to the panellists just to give a quick introduction themselves in terms of who they are and also their organisations. Sharon, if I can move over to yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sunil. So yeah, hi, I'm Sharon. I'm Head of Environment for Building Services at Skanska. So Skanska, we're a multidisciplinary company. So we look at projects, major rail and road projects, utilities, building, and also building services, which covers our MEP and FM activities. So we've been involved in the construction and are currently involved in the construction of some new net zero carbon buildings, and also the maintenance of existing and new builds across commercial, local government, schools, defence and healthcare. So we've had some net zero carbon targets since 2019. We were one of the first contractors to announce those. And that target, our net zero by 2045, covers all of our activities, which mean we include all of those construction streams that I've mentioned. And those targets have been ratified by the Science Based Target Initiative. So from an FM perspective, when we look across our whole portfolio, our FM activities are quite different in terms of how the carbon impact is built up. And because of the nature of the work in FM, embodied carbon is split across a long and diverse supply chain. There's got lots of different materials being used on a daily basis, and that provides a challenge in terms of data collection. However, that means that there's lots of points of intervention and lots of opportunities if we can get the data collection correct. And that's why we need some specific tools and approaches, and why we're so pleased to be involved in the programme that Sunil's just outlined, and we're going to talk about a little bit further in the panel discussion.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Sharon. Sophie?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophie Hooper. I am the Head of Policy at the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, and we are the professional body for workplace and facilities management professionals. Our purpose is clearly about workplace and facilities management and how that transforms organizations and enhances experience. And we support our members through a variety of activities. We've got about 14,000 members that we support through influencing government policies and legislation. We provide insight and research, and we provide a variety of upskilling methodologies and networking. Now, what we are doing in the area of sustainability is on the next slide. Hopefully it's a very busy slide, but I thought it would just be useful to kind of indicate. All that we're doing is meant to be evidence-based. So our blueprint for sustainability policy is based on the sustainability survey from 2021 that was carried out with our network of sustainability special interest group, who are sustainability experts, and Sunil is a part of that. And Effectively, what we saw in our 2021 survey was a clear call to action, because there was that gap between intent and action in three areas: the area of accountable holistic sustainability strategies, data, and the skills to deliver against those strategies. And data is obviously the area where the Scope 3 project that Sunil and my colleagues here are working on to help close the gap. Our pillars of activity focus on three areas. IWFM as an organization in itself has got a footprint, and much like Sharon said, we all have to work on that. Our second pillar is focused on our membership. And we work with those experts in the sustainability group, SIG, to look at the areas that we need to focus on, and then we translate, we work on guidance projects to help support our members to advance in areas. We've also got a sustainability hub where we collect relevant information. But while we are the professional body supporting our members, our mission is beyond that, and it's for the wider sector. So we have got professional standards in place that we've recently reviewed, and the sustainability element has been much expanded on. We're obviously supporting this Scope 3 project because we think it's of immense importance to give FM an industry in whole life cycle discussions. And we work across the built environment sector, especially within the construction industry council with others. And we've got several members of our SIG that sit on the different work streams within that climate change plan there. And of course, we celebrate where our members do well. So we've got our annual awards where climate change is an important part of our celebration, because that is a bit of a showcase for where people can follow in an example. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophie. And Anthony?
Hey everybody, my name's Anthony Heaton. I'm the Sustainability Manager for BAM FM. BAM as a business, much like Skanska, a multidisciplinary construction business based in the UK and Ireland and the Netherlands. That's where our core markets are. And we provide a full range of services from civil engineering to construction of buildings right through to operation and maintenance and FM services. Large business, employing over 7,000 people, and have ability really to have a huge impact in lots of different sectors, which is really quite exciting part of it all. In terms of our sustainability journey, well, our sustainability vision is building a sustainable tomorrow. And over the past 10 years, really, we've really ramped up sustainability and carbon as a metric for sustainability. And we've had some real good successes, and we've got some really good accreditations to our name through a lot of hard work and dedication by our staff and teams. We're very proud to be listed on the CDPA list for our carbon disclosure. We've been there for about 4 years running, I think, which is a great achievement for a business, and something we're very proud of. We've also got some quite strong net zero targets and aspirations, ultimately to be net zero by 2050. That's absolute zero, but we've got interim targets as well, and them interim targets were originally set for 2030, but actually found that through some great work recently, we've been able to accelerate them and bring them down to 2026 as well for direct operations as well. Again, like a lot of organisations, our targets are ratified by the Science Based Targets Initiative, as previously mentioned. And just as a point, really, that again, something that's included in that, which is not in every science-based target, is the fact that we do include some Scope 3 emissions as part of that target and that aspiration. We've been members of the SFMI for, I think, 6 or 7 years now, and I'm proud to say that we're a platinum organisation within the SFMI, placing us in the top band of organisations delivering FM services in a sustainable way. And we're also involved in various other industry groups. We've been the UK Green Building Council's Advancing Net Zero programme, which is leading to, net zero buildings, but of particular interest in the FM business is how we look again and tackle that operation. which is probably a really nice segue into what we're going to talk about here in the panel discussion about how Scope 3 emissions is super important to consider in the operations of a building. Yeah. I'll pass back over to Sunil on that one. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anthony. So yes, as Anthony mentioned, what we'll now do is to break out into the panel discussion. So again, if there's any questions that anyone has, then please do enter them into the chat function, and we can start to run through any of the questions in the areas that you want to go through. What I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen, so then you'll get to see our faces as well. So that should come through. Okay. So the first question which I'd like to look at is around Scope 3 itself, and Anthony, you touched on it in terms of the difficult nature that we have of being able to capture the data and some of the confusing information that we have on that. So particularly in terms of looking at Anthony and Sharon, your involvement in the research project as well. Can you just talk through in terms of the services and activities that you provide to customers and how that comes within the remit of Scope 3? Anthony, if I can ask you first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, so if we take, for example, just the FM part of the business, we'll focus on that today, obviously, with it being the headline for the title. So I mean, we provide in a full total range of FM services. That could be anything from building maintenance, going and doing just general kind of planned preventative maintenance actions. It could be cleaning, it could be catering, it could be grounds maintenance, it could be security, providing staff, catering as well. So I think when you think about all the bits that are needed to make a building run, apart from, the energy part of it coming in, that's kind of everything that we can provide. And when you start to break them down and think in detail about what that actually means, just take catering, for example, in a business, yes, we've got staff coming in and cooking in the kitchen, and you may just think about the energy that's generated by the ovens and such. But actually, there's this food that's being produced, and there's associated emissions with that. There's transporting that food to perhaps a wholesaler or a market. There's the movement of that to the site. There's the storage of that on the site. There's the packaging that's associated with that and the disposal of that. So when you just take one sort of obvious answer and you think, oh, it's just about using less energy in the kitchen. Well, actually, it just starts getting bigger and bigger, like the roots of a tree, and you start to sort of open various different avenues. And part of the work that we've been involved in the Scope 3 project with Acclaro is to start analysing each work stream or workflow that FM delivers, and to start trying to map out some of these standard or consistent emission sources within each work stream. So catering, for example, as I've used, we're starting to map out not just the ovens, but we're starting to map out the transport, we're starting to map out the local suppliers, we're starting to map out the disposal, the waste, and all these kind of things to build up slowly with blocks the bigger picture of what that service is actually, or the impact that service is having. So yeah, I guess in kind of wider terms, Scope 3 reporting, we capture a standard suite of scopes at the moment from the greenhouse gas protocol. But I think we're all capturing stuff, but I think it's the building on that to make it more intelligent and the growing of the understanding of Scope 3 that's probably the most exciting thing about this project for me, because that's opening up everybody's eyes to actually these sort of secondary impacts, and goes to show the stat where the iceberg stat, 20% of it's seen, 80% of it's unseen. Well, it's a little bit like that in Scope 3. So Sharon, do you want to add anything?
I suppose the only thing I was going to add was that it's whilst there's lots of things to consider, it's important that we're considering it, because we have to fully understand and get our heads around what Scope 3 is in order to be able to ask the right questions to our supply chain, who are such a foundation and such an important part of the Scope 3 kind of embodied carbon. And so being able to figure out exactly where the different parts of the activity lies, and being able to ask the direct questions then to our supply chain is really important part of this work, I think. yeah, we cover all the same sort of activities and are unpicking what sits where in terms of the scopes, and that can also be complicated further by if you've got some direct labour, some indirect labour, those sorts of things. So yeah, it's definitely an important, this initial phase of the scoping exercise is really important and is uncovering some quite interesting findings already.
It's interesting as well, just because I think everybody's on this journey, and that's every person that's on this call's organisation, but even our clients that we work for as well, they're all on this journey as well. And I think there's a degree of everybody trying to solve the same puzzle actually in this industry. And you know, we're all, with collaboration and with projects like this, it's allowing us to not just become better at, or inward looking and become better at our data and our sources, but being able to support other organisations to, you know, gather their data as well, or support their scopes, or even just provide better raw data to support what they're trying to capture as well. So I think, you know, current status, you know, we're a lot already looking, trying to get our own house in order, but with a little bit more collaboration, a little bit open-minded, I think we can all sort of move the journey forward together, I think.
And I think you've both raised an interesting question there in terms of the awareness and the upskilling that's needed overall. And so we talk a lot about Scope 3, but I think the practicalities of understanding and implementing it isn't quite there for organisations at every level within their business. In terms of looking at upskilling of sectoral level, and also at organisational level, can you talk through in terms of what you've been doing to prepare teams, the engagement with customers as well as parts of that? And Sophie, if I can ask you first in terms of the sectoral gap that we have.
Yes, sure. So in general, what we see through our surveys is that there isn't sectoral readiness to really tackle this issue. Our sustainability knowledge in general across the sector is focused on the more traditional areas of FM of activity according to our 2021 sustainability survey, so waste management, things like that. And our carbon and net zero survey 2022 kind of confirmed that when it comes to the whole carbon and net zero piece. And only about 14% of our respondents in that survey show that they've got comprehensively skills integrated into their normal service. I mean, what we are seeing is greater awareness and greater uptake of skills, but that 14% of having done it comprehensively is a little bit scary. And I would say that that's also in part because there is no sector-wide solution to some of the problems that we're needing to tackle. So this is why we are supporting the Scope 3 work, because if you have that sector-wide standard to work towards, then you also know very clearly where you need to where and how to upskill people to feed into that solution. And I can leave it at that.
So, I mean, there's a lot that we still need to do then at that sectoral level to try and get both awareness, but also that consistency in place.
Absolutely. And obviously, I've already talked a little bit in the presentation of what we're doing at IWFM level for our members and the wider profession. So it is that upskilling piece, that providing courses, and we will be doing that because of the new professional standards, paying more attention to that. And obviously supporting the work that you're doing, and then we'll be amplifying the guidance, etc., that will be associated with that. Other than that, what we really seek to do as well is just make sure that we can really understand where the gaps are for our members, and we will be delivering things like toolkits, etc., towards how to approach holistic sustainability strategies, because one of the things that we're very much seeing is that so often within organizations it relies on champions, specific champions. There isn't necessarily organization-wide accountability that comes from top and is really driven through. So our toolkit, which is going to be published pretty soon, is trying to give a little bit more of a framework of how organizations really need to tackle it across the organization, because that's what will then unlock budgets for upskilling, etc., but also in first instance the awareness that there needs to be some upskilling, because decisions around this area are often taken at quite high board level around these are our targets. But how that is implemented then is obviously at a more operational level that then kind of go, how do we achieve this? And that is, of course, the moment that is quite critical. So awareness raising is incredibly important. Webinars like here today, news items, etc. So there's lots of work to be done. But what we also would like to do is, as social value, we've got a framework on social value, and that's often a useful tool for people to kind of engage in how to see how they need to put in measures in their totality. And we'd be keen to make sure that this goes through the project also slots into that it gets driven through as best practice.
Fantastic. And at an organisational level, Sharon, can you talk through the work that Skanska have been doing? You've been on this journey for a number of years, the upskilling that's taken place over time.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing to say about the upskilling on carbon is that there's really been a shift to it being a pull, a request, a demand, if you like, when we've had a big uptick in clients asking more questions. That has fed into the fact that our teams now really want to know and understand what they're talking about from a carbon perspective. So that has been helpful, I suppose, in driving a training program, which over the past year has engaged our senior leaders. So all of the senior leadership teams from our president down have been through a full day training course, and then that's been rolled out to more specific cohorts. So our commercial teams have been through a training program, and our design teams have been through a bespoke training program, because we feel that those are the people with the ability to make some direct changes to how they do things on a daily basis that can influence carbon in a positive way. And then the next tranche of training is to try and drill down, because we are quite a diverse business, and specifically from an FM perspective, we want to try and make sure that all the training going forward is specific and bespoke to our markets and customers. There are now a series of bite-sized training programs coming up where we can mix and match different elements from some different parts of the carbon agenda for our specific audience. And that, I think, is reflective of the fact that this desire for knowledge is evolving and becoming more specific. And we are, as I was saying earlier, we've had some interesting findings when we've been talking to our supply chain, that there are things happening in the supply chain that we haven't perhaps been aware of that have come to the fore. And so this relationship with how we can transfer knowledge both to the supply chain but also from them is something that we're wanting to factor in much more this year. So there's a sort of comprehensive approach to the layers, and then this requirement, as sort of Sophie was alluding to try and make things more systemic. So looking at carbon management systems and things that will be embedded into the business that make adhering to a process for carbon much easier for a much greater audience, and transferring the responsibility or the knowledge from a small base of maybe the environmental or sustainability teams to a much bigger percentage of our organisation. So really this year our focus is on trying to hand that over and spread it as wide as we can within the business.
Yeah, so it's not just about training; it's about the collaboration activity as well, and in part it's learning lessons from health and safety, saying it's not a health and safety manager's job; it's everybody's responsibility. And how do we not miss out the 40 years in between?
Yeah.
And another part that we spoke about as well is in terms of the data and the information which we're starting to capture, and that's going to be critical to allow us to make decisions. And I think, Anthony, you mentioned about being able to have conversations with customers as well on that. Can you talk through a little bit in terms of some of the lessons learned around the data collection, how you've been able to improve that as well, but also the kinds of conversations that it's eliciting?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I suppose the first thing sort of what this project and what this process has taught us, or has reminded us, is actually there is a lot of data that we already collect in this field or that's available, should I say, maybe not collect, but it's certainly available to us. And we've been through a process of basically understanding all the stuff that's available without having any extra requirements on anybody to start with, which has been quite an eye-opening exercise in its own right. And as Sharon was alluding to, actually, you can find that there's some really good work going on out there from various different organisations and suppliers. I suppose ultimately what we're trying to get to here is almost like a carbon inventory, really, that we're trying to create about, where are our emissions coming from? What are the biggest sources? Are the biggest sources associated to certain items or certain services or certain products that we're buying? And then what can we do to tackle them? So there's a sort of a systemic approach to how we're going to do this. Ultimately, as well, the better the data we get, the more we've got an opportunity to sort of optioneer or value engineer or whatever you want to charge it, but from a carbon perspective, not just from traditionally it's all price driven, but actually we've got an opportunity here to look at it with a carbon lens and really kind of push back to say, well, actually it may be not the right product because look at the emissions, or look where it's coming from, or it's coming on a boat from a different country, and the associated emissions with that. I suppose as well, it's allowing us to open conversations and chat more freely, more comfortably. I think it's a scary world when you start talking about emissions because you feel like, oh my gosh, is it the right way to do? But, it's allowing us to give a little bit of expertise to the field and give people confidence, particularly the clients that were there. And I guess really, in a true FM sense, it allows us to support our clients, not just in terms of giving them the services that they're paying for, but actually give them the added value that we can also give as an industry. So it's the data is allowing us to just open just better collaborative relationships with our clients, I suppose, in a nutshell.
Yeah, fantastic. We've had some questions coming through about experience of working in airports and looking at carbon emissions activities within an airport. Does anyone have any experience of airport activities or guidance that could be provided? In this sense, I think we're looking at the travel that's taken place, long haul and short haul activities, but also in terms of airside activities and the non-airside based activities. So how would we start to capture and calculate the carbon emissions and measure and monitor that? Because it's quite flexible in terms of flights that are taking place, potential delays that might occur. So it isn't a planned program in many cases. There's a lot of flexibility and change that does occur on a day-by-day basis. And so with that change, would we be looking at having a measure that's based upon a standard, or could we be looking at some kind of real-time monitoring that takes place? So it's that knowledge of real-time data sets coming through versus normalized data sets, and how would capture that.
So I suppose we haven't got direct airport experience, but we are really looking closely at the real-time data and interventions in buildings, as they're being used in the same way, some of the buildings, hospitals, schools. So we've got areas where there are large spaces being used by lots of different people, perhaps not in the way that we would envisage them to be used always. And so we are finding that the digital avenues that are open to us are becoming more and more attractive, both to us and the clients. So sensors and being able to actually map in real time how people's behaviours and their movements and what they're doing can be, at the moment, manually tweaked to increase the efficiency from an FM perspective. So in terms of, lighting, heating, cooling, etc. But with a view that eventually that would become more and more automated, and the building would become smarter and able to deal with those changes based on historical information. And what we found in the building that we occupy now is just that all sorts of things happen on a daily basis, with meeting rooms being booked for a certain activity suddenly changing, many more people being there, having carbon sensors and light sensors and heat sensors allows us to have the correct air change, the correct comfort levels that mean that there's a comfort and a productivity aspect, which means that we get far less phone calls and complaints about things being too hot or too cold or not comfortable, but also from an energy perspective has allowed for significant energy savings, in double figures in terms of the percentage energy saved over a year just through these sorts of adjustments. So I would suggest, I suppose, in areas where there's unpredictable activity or occupation, the role of digital and sensors and real-time monitoring is increasing, and is really yielding some good outcomes. So that might be a suggestion.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, I would just say as well that the targets themselves that you are benchmarking against, they may have peaks and troughs in terms of use patterns and various anomalies, but there will be other targets within the organisation that will still suffer them same peaks and troughs and those. So, there's lessons to be learned from other sectors now, whether that's financial reporting, whether that's safety reporting, whether that's, quality reporting. There will be other things that will have to be tracked than same peaks and troughs that we're trying to track. So, there may be, in some respects, there's nothing too fixed about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get data, we're trying to monitor, we're trying to benchmark and improve. How you do that, you guys can, you can be the master of your own destiny in some respects. And, the target may fit your organization. It might not be an off-the-shelf thing. It might be something that you guys need to develop. And I'm sure organizations like ourselves on this call would be more than happy to kind of have them kind of conversations and work that out with you, with my advice.
Yeah, fantastic. And I've also been involved in doing some direct airport monitoring before. We've looked after a few airports before. Typically, the aircraft element is almost treated as a tenant in a building perspective. So it's a third-party activity, and so you request data there as you would do with a tenant or with a supplier. So the airport's role is very much about provision of operations, not about the actual aircraft themselves. So there's an engagement strategy with fuel types, but also in terms of the standing grounds in the same way you would have with a supplier or with a tenant within a building as well. So there's that relationship that it comes back to that collaboration piece again that we've spoken about. We've also had another question about sharing transparency. So do you think that sharing transparency on methodologies or standard methodologies for Scope 3 will avoid the potential for double counting?
I think from on the sharing methodology thing, I think it's one of the kind of key things that's drawn us as BAM to the table, really, because I think for a long time, being able to compare apples with apples is just something that hasn't ever been able to be done, and therefore, what chance has anybody got of kind of, you're just relying on somebody's claims, really, in some respects. I know we're all honest organisations, we've all got verification standards behind us, but, if you can't compare from a client's point of view, it becomes a little bit of a wild west about, what's in scope, what's out of scope, what's part of it, what's not part of it, and therefore, a collaborative methodology that's been agreed by some significant people and some significant organisations in and around the industry is a real positive kind of thing. It can only be positive in my eyes, really. And if we've all got something to, whether it's a direct delivery against the targets or whether it's in line and working alongside or in the vein of, it's still pushing us all to be a far more harmonised industry than anything that we've currently got at the moment. So I think that's great.
Could I just build on that, Sunil? Because I fully agree with that. I think it's only by having sector-wide standardization in place that you can create that competitive condition for driving better practices. And I think that the better data collection against the comparable standard also allows us then to keep organizations accountable where they're making claims about their impact on our world in terms of service provision and achieving those business and real life outcomes. And I would add on top of that, having the data across the FM sector, then applied on this specific example, also gives FM a real voice in contributing to whole life cycle solutions, because we haven't got sector-wide data at the moment to really demonstrate the impact of this particular area. And that can only be achieved by collaboration and by having that comparable standardization in place. And therefore, yes, absolutely the way forward.
Sharon, did you want to add anything?
Only to say that on the notion of having a standard, I think that's one of the only ways that, as I've talked about before, transferring this from the small to the many and having a standardized approach. And on the issue of double counting, I think that that's something that we definitely have to be mindful of. But at the moment, I think just the counting is a real challenge. And we'll be able to get to that point once everybody's got some better data to make sure we're not overlapping. But we've got to do the first step first, I think.
Yeah. I think it's very much, as you say, it's about the maturing profession, but it is moving, it's the accounting bit of it. So we're moving in a similar train as the financial areas. So in the same way that multiple projects and activities can lead to potential double counting, but there are systems and processes out there to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have the same overlay from a greenhouse gas perspective as well. But if we don't have the data in the first place, and if we don't have an element of understanding and accuracy over it, the rest of it becomes a bit of a moot point as well. Yeah. So just looking at a closing statement from each of you in terms of what's the one thing which you'd like the audience to take away from the conversation that we've had in terms of advice that you could provide to them in terms of starting first, or key messaging for them to be able to relate back out to their stakeholders. Sophie, let's start with yourself.
Thank you. I was anticipating this question, and I probably changed my mind about 3 times throughout this conversation about what I would say. And I think I have to reach back to what I've just said. In essence, it's the collaboration piece. Both within organizations, collaborate within organizations to share out the accountability and responsibility towards working towards net zero. And then the sector-wide collaboration. We're at the beginning of a journey, but we have got very much an end date in sight. And only through collaboration and agreed methodologies will we be able to meaningfully get towards that target. And it will also allow FM to really illustrate its role within that. So collaboration is my leading message.
Yeah. Sharon?
Yeah, I think for me, from an FM perspective, at the moment, there's a lot of focus on embodied and operational carbon, quite rightly. But if we think about FM, facilities management, the management of buildings is happening all day, often all night, every day, every year across all of our building stock. So it's a significant contributor to whole life carbon that I think at the moment, perhaps isn't being looked at in great detail, but soon will come sharply into focus. So for any companies that are considering whether they should be looking into this as part of their carbon journey, I would say it's never too soon to start, because the demand for this data is coming, and it's important. So I would say get going as soon as possible.
Fantastic. And Anthony?
Yeah, very much in the same vein, really. I think there's an old proverb that says like perfect's the enemy of good. And I think what I'm meaning by that is that don't let perfection in trying to get everything right, everything there, all 15 scope 3 emissions boxed off, ticked off there, prevent you from actually starting collecting some base data at the moment and starting this journey, much like Sharon was mentioning there. To swallow it all is a bit like the swallowing the elephant kind of thing. There's a lot to get through, but there's some really nice simple steps that you can start to make that will make big improvements and highlight some really key factors and key impacts in your organization. So as Sophie was saying, as Sharon was saying, as I think we're all saying here, is kind of don't be afraid, get stuck in. Don't worry if it's not perfect the first time. There's lots of guidance, there's lots of support, and I think you'll suddenly quite quickly make some big inroads into your impacts in this field.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, I'd reiterate, everyone's learning on this journey, and nobody's got this bottomed out, even the organisations, the big corporates and the organisations working on this for a number of years. So we're all working together on how do we capture together better quality data and improved information. Collaboration then becomes a critical part, and it's collaboration with both your upstream organisations and also your downstream. So if you've got services, then how do you also engage with those also individuals as well? The capture of that data, potentially using digital services to improve the data quality as well that's coming through, but working as well with supply chain for that data capture and the information that comes through. And it is very much about making a start regardless. So don't wait for the other measures or activities to happen next year. Start small if you need to, but start and making a collection and starting to pull a lot of this together. Thank you very much, all. So fantastic. I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panellists, Sophie, Anthony and Sharon. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope everyone's got a lot out of it. I certainly have. In terms of if you want to get in touch with the SFMI, a lot of the information that we've spoken about in terms of the standard and in terms of some materials is available through the website here, the Acclaro Advisory SFMI website. And that's also where we'll be posting additional information, a standard guidance, and also some additional materials in there. And if you do want to get involved in the research and also got some commentary on what we can utilise that for, please do email us as well as sfmi@acclaroadvisory.com. Thank you very much to everyone, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.